The violence of my title is not, as you might at first think, that of the boxing ring, but rather the kind within our country. And the racism, well, it persists because it's structural. It's at the basis of society, too. Between these two photos of Muhammad Ali, the boxer and Olympic champion at age 18, and the torchbearer at age 54, 36 years pass. And the focus of my presentation will be what happened during that time, which is likely not very well known by younger audiences today. When Ali died, he was the greatest. He was known primarily as Ali. He didn't even need his first name to be recognized around the world. His death was covered widely in all kinds of markets. And yet he suffered between Rome and Atlanta for acting out of his conscience, for following his ideals, persisting in them, and along the way he became beloved around the world. What did he do between Rome and Atlanta that so offended some people? Well, here he is on television, age 25, April 18th, 1867, and he's there because he refused the draft, he refused induction, he refused to join the military. He claimed the right to be a conscientious objector, a right that has been part of American law and practice since the Civil War. His basis was his religious beliefs. Here are some of the ideas that Ali had about war and why he was unwilling to participate in it. He clearly saw the importance of race as an element in American foreign policy, as well as the mistreatment of people in another country as he perceived it. Some people said his choices were jail or the army. Ali thought he had another choice, which was justice. Since his claim of conscientious objection was based in part on his religious beliefs in the Nation of Islam, which he belonged to, and whose members did not participate in the military. Now, he refused the draft. We all know that the innocent are presumed that guilt has to be proven later. That's the American basis of justice, right? But within minutes of him refusing the draft, Ali was stripped of his championship. The boxing commissioner of New York took away his license to fight, that is, his right to earn a living through his profession, and state after state followed suit. He could not box anymore. It was assumed that his beliefs were insincere, and yet in claiming them and pursuing them, he gave up $3 to $4 million a year in income. Who said, guard against the impostures of pretend patriotism? George Washington, his farewell address in 1796. And this slide comes from other members of the military, namely Veterans for Peace, and they believe that dissent is patriotic. It isn't much of a stretch to say that the existence of the United States is based on dissent from the rule of a colonial power in England. Ali went to trial. His jury was all white, and 30 minutes later they came forward with their verdict. Guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to the maximum sentence, 5 years in jail and a $10,000 fine. Now, while this case makes its way through the courts, I'd like to share with you some context for what's going on around Ali and in this period of history in the United States, particularly as it relates to Black people and Vietnam. Here's an image of Ali with Malcolm X. I forgot to mention this. Look at the headline, Clay gets 5 years. Cassius Clay, his birth name was given up prior to the court case soon after he won his first championship. He gave up what he considered to be a slave name for Muhammad Ali. And yet, look what the Houston paper calls him. It refuses to acknowledge the name that he assumed when he joined the Nation of Islam. Here's that image of Malcolm X. Malcolm X was born Malcolm Little. He too was a member of the Nation of Islam. He too gave up a name that was associated with slavery. And although he was in the Nation of Islam for years, he eventually gave it up for the more international, more mainstream form of Islam. And Ali did precisely the same in later years. I've included this image of Dr. King, again, to help you understand the context of the times. 2 weeks before Ali refused the draft in Houston, here we have Dr. King at Riverside Church in New York, April 7th, 1967, exactly a year to the day before he was assassinated. And he finally comes out in public to a large audience about his feelings about Vietnam, a time to break silence. He's opposed to the war because he thinks it's an enemy of the poor. He also says, quote, Negro and white boys will kill and die together for a nation unable to seat them together at the same school. Dr. King's speech to an overflowing audience that filled Riverside Church was reviled across the country. The next day, 168 newspapers came out against it. Civil rights organizations, including most black ones, were opposed to what Dr. King had to say. A Harris poll that followed found of Dr. King's war stance, it was opposed by 75% of Americans, 55% of African Americans. So this is the context in which Ali is standing forward and saying, I won't be drafted. And I want to add quickly that between this date of Dr. King's great speech, which should be more widely taught, I think, and the end of the war, 78% of American soldiers died. Between the time Dr. King came out against the war and its eventual end, 78% of the American soldiers, the 58,000 who died in Vietnam, died. Here's a little bit more of the context. The 1968 Democratic Convention. This is a year after the speech. It's a year and some months after Ali refuses the draft. Many in the audience might think that everyone was opposed to Vietnam. We now look on it back as being a terrible failure, the loss of 58,000 lives. And yet at no time whatsoever, did a majority of Americans want to see an immediate withdrawal. So this too is the context of Ali's sticking to his conscience, sticking to his ideals, and refusing to be drafted. 4 years later, his conviction is overturned by the Supreme Court, primarily on the finding that his beliefs were sincere, they were honestly held, and that qualified him to be classified a conscious objector. This is a wonderful summary by Ali of his situation. If I'd gone to prison, I would do it because if I didn't follow my true beliefs, I would never be free again. Sometimes I hear myself described as a draft dodger. I did not dodge the draft. I did not run to Canada, and I did not hide in this country. I reported to the Army Induction Center, and as I had been ordered to do so, I asserted my right as a conscientious objector to refuse the draft, and I was prepared to go to prison for 5 years if I had to. I worked within the system. I'm speaking to you from Louisville, where Ali was born. And here is his grave. Having refused the draft, having eventually become honored in his own country, respected for his beliefs, he became revered around the world as a peacemaker, as a lover of all people, regardless of religion or race, regardless of their economic circumstances. He did indeed serve all, and as this motto says on his grave, service to others is the rent you pay for your room in heaven. Here's a picture of me with Muhammad Ali about 10 years ago. I had the honor to be with him for part of a day. And here are some other sources if you're interested in more information on this topic. Thank you.